Hello and welcome. This is part 2 of the IP tables tutorial. If you are new to IP tables, it is highly recommended that you start with part 1. Please see the link to that video in the description. If you check the description of the video, you will also see a link to the firewall script as it looked at the end of part 1 and part 2 for your convenience. Also, there were some requests for transcripts, and I have provided links to transcripts of part 1 and part 2 as well. Last week we covered setting up default targets for the three main chains, those being input, output, and forward, as well as poking holes through the firewall to allow specific services in. This week we are going to cover setting up custom chains, filtering by IP address and protocol, and port redirection. IP tables scripts really are little programs, and style is as important in these scripts as it is when working with any other programming language. The scripts should be logical and human readable. In this spirit, the first thing we are going to do is improve the flow of our firewall, even though it will not change its functionality at all. We are going to create our own custom chain and direct all the services we want to allow through it. First, we are going to have to declare the new chain. This is done with the -n switch, and we will insert this line towards the top of the script. We can name the new chain's services. Now, we are going to separate the lines that allow services in from the others. We are going to change the target chain of these rules from input to services. Finally, we need to decide where in the input chain we want to branch off of to redirect the packets through the services chain. We will insert this branch after the rule to accept packets from loopback. The command to branch to the new chain is simply as follows. Whenever you jump to a custom chain, the packet will pass through the rules in the custom chain, then jump down the original chain as shown in this diagram. We do not need to put a special rule to jump back to the built-in chain. Now that our script is a little better organized, let's consider a slightly different situation than we have previously. Let's say that this computer is running a print server, and we want to allow local network access to the print server, but restrict it from the internet. The local network is behind a router that is set to distribute addresses to local machines between 192.168.1.1 and 192.168.1.254. What we need to do is add a rule that will match a certain port only if the source IP is one that would be given out by our network. Let's append the new line to our services chain. This line will match packets based on their IP range, since we want to allow packets arriving from machines with local IP addresses only. The -p TCP switch means that we will accept packets from the TCP protocol. Finally, the -d port switch means that we will match packets destined for port 631, which is the standard port for a CUP server. To also allow UDP access, we need to make a new rule, exactly the same, except with UDP instead of TCP. We have now allowed local access to the printer, and disallowed internet users. Let's consider one more possibility for today. This scenario is going to delve into some principles that we won't be covering in depth until part 3, but let's have a quick look. Let's say that we have a web service on our machine that doesn't start as root, so it is unable to bind to standard port 80. However, we still want others to be able to reach our service on the standard port so that they don't have to remember an awkward URL with a port override. Because we want to change packet data and redirect it from one port to another, we can't use the filter table. We're going to have to use the Network Address Translation Table, or NAT for short. Once these packets have been altered, they will then pass through the forward chain because they are considered to be routed even though only the port has been changed. Finally, we need to allow the service on the standard services chain. I know this is a lot to swallow at once, but please bear with me because there will be many details filled in next time. First, we need to get rid of our rule about accepting traffic on port 80 because our web server no longer is bound to port 80. Next, we need to set the default targets for the three chains on the NAT table. They are output, pre-routing, and post-routing. We do that with these lines. Next, we are going to add the rule that actually redirects the packet. Let's say our web server is bound to port 8080. We will redirect it to port 80 with the following line. This is simple enough. Now, since these packets will next be passing through the forward chain, we need to add a rule stating that these packets are okay. Finally, the packet will pass through the standard input chain like any other. So we need to add this line to our services chain. Now, when we run our firewall, all traffic directed at port 80 will arrive on our machine on port 8080. Tune in 2 weeks for part 3 of the IP tables tutorial.